Welcome back to the Right on Crime podcast. I'm Carley Widner, and I'm joined today by my co-host Nikki Pressley and our lovely North Carolina State Director, Maggie Horzempa. Welcome to the show, Maggie.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to be back in Austin.
Yes, of course. And today we're talking about something that I find really interesting, which is autopsy, something that I didn't even consider whenever, evaluating criminal justice issues. But I'd really love to hear from you what a forensic autopsy is and how does that differ from a regular autopsy?
Yeah, so just starting at the very basics of everything, an autopsy is an examination of a body after death. The differences come in when looking at the cause of death. So a clinical autopsy is when somebody died of what they presume to be natural causes or a medical condition. And a forensic autopsy is when there's a little bit more suspicion behind cause of death, murder, maybe opioid overdose of some sort, and something else along those lines, where they're trying to put together pieces of a puzzle to help solve a potential crime. Forensic autopsies can be ordered by law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, and like I said, this helps them put together pieces of the puzzle so that a crime can get solved.
And so if there's a certain crime that comes in and there's a greater sense of urgency, would that then take precedent over some of the other forensic autopsies that have been ordered, or do they kind of go in line of when they came in?
Potentially. I believe that they go in order of when they came in, but with the backlog going on, it seems like everything is pushed back, especially in the state of North Carolina right now.
Mm-hmm. So tell us more about the backlog. What is it looking like, and what do you think caused the backlog currently?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, North Carolina is currently going through an autopsy backlog, but this is not just limited to the state of North Carolina. States like Mississippi, West Virginia, even Georgia a few years ago have also experienced similar backlogs. And what's happening is the chief medical examiner's office is just becoming so overwhelmed. While the legislature passed funding a few years ago to try and bolster those resources back up, there's really a problem of retention and individuals that just have the skill set to be able to complete autopsies. On top of that, the office is being subpoenaed, and those experts, the few that we have, are being taken away from their work to have to sometimes travel across the state to give expert testimony. So it really is a retention and just a lack of individuals being able to carry out these tasks to perform autopsies.
Who do you think feels the effects of these delays the most, and what does this mean for families who are waiting for answers from their loved one's autopsy?
So autopsies, it's funny that you mentioned that you didn't really think of autopsies when it came to kind of the way that the pieces of the criminal justice system fit together. And I felt the same before I learned about the autopsy backlog. But really everybody involved in that system feels it. So you have law enforcement that's being held up, and you have prosecutors, judges, and then also, too, what to do with any sort of suspects while waiting. So there's prison overcrowding that's contributing. And like you mentioned, victims as well. There's families that are already severely distressed and confused by the loss of a loved one, and delayed autopsies could mean delayed justice for these individuals.
Yeah, not just all of those resources then kind of feeling jumbled whenever they're addressing this one particular part of the criminal justice system. Most people probably don't think of medical examiners as a key component of that. So how can people in North Carolina consider them more whenever they're making any voting decisions or generally about public safety?
So I think you really have to look at the public safety system as a whole. Mm-hmm. I think it's very easy to assume that more police officers, the safer that we are. But what happens when a crime is committed? And like I had mentioned earlier, the swifter an autopsy happens, the better it is for everybody. The faster officers can get back to their jobs and move on to the next tough thing that they have to tackle. Judges, prosecutors are freed up as well. And then also the jail space is reserved for those that are the most violent. So it really is taking just a small piece of the puzzle looking at it and saying, okay, in order to have a justice system that overall works really, really well, we have to have balance between all of these places.
Yeah, so you mentioned sort of while we're waiting for autopsy diagnoses, I guess, or results, what do we do with potential suspects if there is foul play or if law enforcement believes there might be? And you mentioned how swift justice is very, very important. And we know that the biggest deterrent to crime is the swiftness and certainty. So the certainty of being caught. And Right on Crime has been very involved in clearance rates and clearance rate legislation and trying to get resources to law enforcement. But can you talk a little bit about how this impacts clearance rates and maybe clearance rates in North Carolina, and what can we do that is not just we need more law enforcement? How can we improve the system as a whole?
Absolutely. You bring up a really good point with clearance rates, and the longer autopsies are delayed, there's, of course, you know, if you've ever seen anything like Law and Order or Scarpetta, you realize that, you know, there's processes that occur once somebody has died. And if these bodies decay to a point where you can't get certainty from an autopsy and add that key piece of evidence into the whole when examining a case, you're going to have lower clearance rates. You're going to have crimes that go unsolved and families of victims that never find justice or closure in what happened to their loved one. And you also, too, could have dangerous individuals that are let out simply because an autopsy was not able to be carried out. So sometimes these individuals are held depending on jail space, but when jails get overcrowded and there's pressure put on the justice system, we all know that sometimes the most violent individuals don't end up where they ought to be.
And so North Carolina has made some investments into the chief medical examiner's office, from my understanding.
Yes.
And it hasn't exactly had the results, I think, that y'all were hoping for. And so what are other investments or ideas surrounding how to improve this that isn't just providing that office more funds?
Absolutely. So the legislature did pass funding for the office a few years ago, but like you said, it really did not produce the results the state needed. Some things that they can look at is development, recruitment efforts, and retention efforts, making sure that we're able to give these very specialized individuals, which there's very few of right now in the state and across the country, the competitive salaries that they need, and also to funding these offices further, if that is deemed necessary, through grants or offering student loan repayment plans. I believe Arizona and Maricopa County gives something like almost $100,000 back towards school debt for those that go into any sort of profession that would relate to the medical examiner's office, which I think is great. Anything to bolster retention and recruitment.
Definitely.
What does that process look like to become a medical examiner? How much of an investment would that be for the individual maybe considering going into that profession?
So I believe it's similar to that of going to medical school, and there's got to be some sort of specialized training as well, because you're dealing with a body that's no longer living. So it's very, very specialized, and like I had mentioned earlier, it's leading to a lot of recent backlog in not just North Carolina, but in states across the country as well.
And if lawmakers and public safety leaders could just take one step or one action a year to really progress this issue, what would you advocate for that being?
That's such a great question. I think when we think about public safety and criminal justice reform, we always think about playing defense. We always think about, really battening down the hatches when something awful happens. And we sometimes ignore the benefit of playing offense and making sure that our system is ready to handle the worst of the worst. And I believe that looking at issues like the autopsy backlog in North Carolina contributes to that more, a justice system that's able to handle these bad things when they arise, and that keeps, all North Carolinians and all Americans safer.
Incredible. Well, I've learned a lot today about a topic that I had, frankly, not much a clue about, and I'm really grateful for you for coming on. If you want to learn more about autopsies or different criminal justice efforts we have in North Carolina and across other of our 16 states, you can go to rightoncrime.com and follow us along on social media.